What I like about it is just it's not a movie about a single brand or a single culprit, but it's a movie about a system, and I think this is quite clear, the systemic nature on how working poverty and environmental degradation is produced by the industry. And the way in which this is linked, I would say that these words are used in the movie to a sort of economic bulimia, right? So the way in which you have this economic metabolism that whose speed has reached an incredible level. And to an extent, I think this is a very useful point to start reflecting on what the message of the movie, because it's not a movie about a single disaster. Although you do see reference to Rana Plaza, it's not about only capturing the exceptionality of certain circumstances, and to an extent, even to talk about these disasters as exceptional event is actually misplaced, because they are moments that remind us what having a poorly paid, extremely hazardous job might entail eventually. To work in poverty is completely entrenched in the garment industry, in the very process of work. And actually, current media is trying to make this point, exposing us to what is now known as the debate on modern slavery. And I still have mixed feelings about the debate in itself, because my sense is you have a fair degree of sensationalism, whereby you actually refer to modern slavery primarily looking at the extremes, so try to make the point that this lies somewhat outside of the system itself. So you talk about bonded labor, you talk about forced labor, traffic labor. But effectively, instead, if you look at the movie, if you look at the Bangladeshi woman workers that is interviewed, Shima, she instead refers to what are called a number of degrees of labor unfreedom. So you are exposed to an extremely high number of unfreedom as a worker. So she's unfree from violence and from harsh shop floor practices. So she'll tell you she's locked into the factory, she's actually experienced beatings, harassment of different types. That is one type of labor and freedom we find. And then also we find freedom from her ability to reproduce as anything but an individual worker. So she cannot reproduce as a member of her own family. So you've seen in the movie she has to accompany her child back to the village because the factory regime will not satisfy these needs, right? So she has to give her back. There's also a third type of unfreedom that I think you do not see in the movie, but some of us working with garment workers for a long time, we just try to stress this point over and over again, that, you know, the movie ends with Shima's aspirations and hopes, right? But actually, if you look at reports, they tend to show that these workers are checked out of the sweatshop by the age 30, 35.
The first time that I went to Bangladesh, what I witnessed changed my perception of fashion forever, because there was an armed guard at the door. The floors of the factories were packed with women. All the windows were closed. There were bars at the window. There was no fire escape. They said they had 2 toilet breaks a day. They couldn't leave the factory without, the armed guard questioning them. They were working 12, 14 hours a day, producing then 100 pieces an hour. Today they produce between 150 and 200 pieces an hour because the minimum wage has increased, so they have to produce more. The single thing that shocked me most, I think, was that it dawned on me that as a woman living in England, by buying in a certain way, I was actually complicit in enslaving another woman on the other side of the world.
The workers have a very clear analysis and understanding of the fact that it's the brands that are responsible for their working conditions, who are largely reaping in millions and millions and millions of dollars of profit, and not really having to be accountable at all to paying reasonable wages because there's no way to hold them accountable at the moment.
I went back to Bangladesh to see what had happened after Rana Plaza. Has anything changed? There's been the Accord, the Alliance. A lot of the brands have done big pledges. What's happening in Bangladesh? Nothing has changed. absolutely nothing. And in fact, it got even worse because most of the fast fashion brands today, they are, hopping from one country to the other in pursuit of the cheapest possible production line, because we want to buy cheaply and we want to buy fast.
Most of the factories that they work in employ groups of thugs who then sexually harass the women to and from work if they're part of a union. That's quite normal. We have completely normalised a system that is entirely based on the exploitation of mostly women.
They sold us the dream that it's democratic to buy the t-shirt for £5. Lidl is selling jeans at £3.99. And it's like, how can you produce so low? Now you know how.
But my overwhelming reaction to it was how disgusting it was that for a cheap afternoon of shopping pleasure, we could be doing so much damage. Reminiscent of the mill workers of Lancashire and the time when wealthy individuals in this country were happy to enjoy the fruits of enslaved labour. But we decided in this country and in the developed world to end those practices through legislation. And that really brings me to the law. Is it actually lawful for people to be working under those conditions and for those kind of wages? And the position in international law is clearly that it's not. The Lawyers' Circle, along with Trust Law and the Clean Clothes Campaign, is working on a project looking at 15 states, relevant laws, and the possibility of bringing in some kind of international mechanism. And if you're not signed up to that single standard, then possibly those goods shouldn't be allowed into, say, the EU or America. It would at least provide some kind of guarantee, and it would reduce that race to the bottom.
Boycott is certainly not an answer. We really disagree with the idea that one brand is better than another brand, particularly in a system where they're all largely as bad as each other and benefiting off the same low wages and poor safety within factories.
So let's start buying in a different way, and so that the women on the other side of the world know that we really value their lives the same as our life.
I would encourage all of you to do what you can to see, to hear the voices of workers themselves, and do what you can to pressure the brands in whatever way you can, and our own governments to hold corporations to account. I mean, here in the UK, we don't have any way of holding UK-based companies to account for their actions overseas. It's not impossible for us to do that. There just needs to be the political will, and public opinion plays a really big role in that. So I would urge all of you to get involved.
It's not so much that we need to end consumption, it's just that we need to pay more and have less. And paying more and having less actually would be more than enough. And that seemed to me just a very simple answer to the whole thing. Let's have fewer clothes and pay more for them, and let the people who make them for us live decent lives and be paid a decent wage.
So I hope that all of you tonight will leave this room not only wanting to rewear your clothes all the time, buy a bit less, but also join the circle, go online, see it, because it's an incredible network of women, and each one, and it's based on the power of women.
I hope you'll join me to thank our speakers, our panel members. Yes.